Social explanations of obedience. So social explanation of obedience refer to agentic state and legitimate authority. So it's important that you know that those two link to the umbrella term of social explanations, because you could be asked a question in the exam that is outline and evaluate social explanations of obedience, and you need to know that that refers to agentic state and legitimate authority, and you talk about both of those in your answer. So agency theory is where we are acting as agents on behalf of someone else. So we are doing as we are told. We feel less responsibility for our actions, and that is called being in the agentic state. So we are losing personal responsibility, we are being less in control of our behaviour, we are doing it on behalf of someone else. And that is the opposite of being in an autonomous state, where we do not follow orders and we think for ourselves. So generally we start in an autonomous state where we think of ourselves, but then we become obedient and we enter the agentic state. And that movement from autonomous to agentic state is called the agentic shift. And Milgram claimed that there are binding factors that may have kept his participants in the agentic state. So reluctance to disrupt the experiment, pressure of the surroundings, and insistence of the authority figure. And binding factors reduce the moral strain and causes us to ignore the damaging effects of being obedient. So as I said, agentic state, we are acting on behalf of someone else. We are not responsible for our actions. We are doing it because they told us to. So in Milgram's research, the experimenter told the participants to shock the learner. They are not responsible for their actions. So supporting evidence for this. So when Milgram's participants were reminded they had responsibility for their own actions, that very few of them were prepared to obey. So obedience rates decreased. So when they were reminded that they were in the autonomous state, that they weren't acting as an agent for someone else, they refused to obey. Obedience rates decrease. So it supports agency theories because people will obey when they believe that they are not responsible for their actions and the authority figure is. We've got contradictory evidence suggesting that rather than agentic state being responsible for the Holocaust, it is the experience of carrying acts of evil over a long period of time that changed the way that the individuals thought and behaved. So agentic state might not actually be able to explain Nazi Germany. Could be that it's graduated commitment of the starting off with small acts and gradually increasing that could explain how that took place. Which of the following statement best describes agentic state? So people feeling responsible for their actions and act according to own principles. Well, that would be autonomous, so it's not that one. People feel they are not responsible for actions of the group. People make others feel responsible for their actions. People no longer feel responsible for their actions as they are acting on an authority figure. So you should have that it is D, because remember, when you are in an agentic state, you are not responsible for their actions, and your actions are on behalf of someone else, the authority figure. They are responsible for the way you are behaving. Legitimate authority. So we accept people's authority, and that is agreed by society. So we recognise that some people are of a higher authority to us, such as police, doctors, teachers. These examples of legitimate authority who are given the right to tell us what to do. So we are aware that the police should tell us what to do, doctors will tell us what to do. And legitimate authority comes from having defined social roles that people respect. It usually implies that they have expertise, knowledge, or legal power. We hand over that control of trust to the authority figure, and we learn to do this throughout our childhood. When Milgram reran his study down in rundown offices, obedience rates were lower than when he ran it in a prestigious university. So the setting informed the authority of the researcher. So when it was a prestigious university, implied that it had legitimate authority. Okay, so we have supporting evidence. So as we said, obedience rates were much higher in the setting of Yale University, prestigious academic institution. Also, when the researcher wore a lab coat, obedience rates was much higher in comparison to when they wore everyday clothes. So the lab coat would act as a legitimate authority. It gave him higher status, gave him more prestige. Okay, you might be able to explain cultural differences in obedience. So reflects differences in legitimacy of authority. So Germans were 85% obedient. But it can also be used to justify harming others. When directed by a legitimate authority figure to engage in moral actions, people are willing to do so, and this unquestioning obedience to authority occurs no matter how destructive the actions are, especially true in the military. So it could help actually legitimize harming others, but we could add a counter argument that actually could help explain real life examples of obedience in the military, such as the US Army and the My Lai massacre that took place. Explain 2 explanations of obedience for 6 marks. So legitimate authority for 3 marks, and then agentic state for 3 marks. When you're a passenger on a train, you are much more likely to move to another seat if the ticket collector tells you to move than another passenger. Use your knowledge of why people obey to explain this behaviour. So it is his uniform that is giving him the prestige. He has higher status than another passenger, and we're more likely to obey due to legitimate authority, and to go into a bit more detail about what legitimate authority is.